Hello everyone, so now that my Gojira project is all done, it's time for some dinosaur headbutting fun. So one could say a Pachycephalosaurus is now on the way. So to start this dinosaur project off today, these will be the materials being used, I say. Aluminum armature wire to help make the base frame, you could say, as well as some oven-baked clay to make the bones, I do say. As well as some plasticine clay so we don't have to deal with floppy limbs all day. We'll also be stuffing this Pachycephalosaurus full of tinfoil, you could say, because that'll help keep the weight down so he could butt heads with his opponents all day. But before I get too carried away with the poetry today, we'll be learning some fun facts about this dinosaur along the way. Because it just so happens to be part of the Pachycephalosauridae family. I couldn't help but squeeze that one last one in. Pachycephalosaurus is an ornithischian dinosaur that is only known from a single species, which sadly is just a skull. It lived in the late Cretaceous 72.1 to 66 million years ago, and was the largest of its species at 4.5 meters long and approximately 1.8 meters tall, and weighing in at 820 pounds to 990 at its maximum, or 370 to 450 kilograms. Remains have been found in the Lance Formation as well as the famous Hell Creek Formation in the western United States. And the name is Greek for thick-headed lizard, and that comes from the thick dome on the top of the Pachycephalosaurus's head, which is honestly quite suiting. However, some of its, earlier evolving stages, which we'll get to later on in the video, do have cooler names in my opinion. Fragmentary fossils have been found in such places as South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and other places such as Alberta, which happens to have a couple close living relatives. So what did the Pachycephalosaurus look like? So the Pachycephalosaurus wasn't a huge dinosaur, only being about 15 feet long and was weighing in at about 1,000 pounds at its maximum. The most interesting or famous thing about this dinosaur obviously was its skull, due to that large, thick dome placed on top of its head. So we gotta jump to a side note here, because this dinosaur has some interesting controversy about it. The controversy involves three dinos, the first being Pachycephalosaurus, Stygimoak being the second, and last but not least, Draco-Rex. And Draco-Rex, personally, I think has got the coolest name. Translated, that means Dragon King. However, despite how cool this name might be, it's technically probably not a valid species, because all three of these dinosaurs are technically classified as Pachycephalosaurids, under the family name Pachycephalosaurus. Now the controversy goes as follows. These dinosaurs are believed to be all part of the same species. They're all believed to either be a Pachycephalosaurus, a Stygimoak, or a Draco-Rex, not individual species. Back in the day when these dinosaurs were being discovered, scientists were in a bit of a rush to name as many dinosaurs as possible to, make themselves look better, which is basically the entire Bone Wars, which is a topic on its own, and someday would probably like to actually talk about that, but not sure how I'm supposed to integrate that into stop motion exactly. But that sounds like a future me problem. Unfortunately, these guys are essentially lumped into this mess because they were seen to be different enough to get their own taxon. But paleontologists have gone and studied their skulls and studied the growth of the bones, and have found there's a very good chance that the Draco-Rex evolves into a Stygimoak, and the Stygimoak turns into a Pachycephalosaurus. Sort of like the evolution of Pokemon, but in real life. And this is just seen at different stages in their lives. So I guess that concludes only one thing. Gotta catch them all, Pachycephalosaurus. The one thing that actually proves this theory is we don't have any old Draco-Rexes, and we don't have any old Stygimoaks, and we don't have any young Pachycephalosauruses. And these dinosaurs have always been found strictly in their age groups. It should also be noted that not a lot of fossils have been found, period, so these are just kind of estimations. However, they were all found in the same general area, which might be just a big coincidence. However, it's kind of weird how three dome-headed dinosaurs are all living at the same exact area as well as the exact same time period. There is a very good chance that this theory is correct, but obviously not 100% proven, and that is basically the conclusion of our side note, which should be remembered for part 2 of this dinosaur project, because obviously we'll be doing a deeper dive in this theory for next time. And if you've enjoyed the content so far, be sure to smash that like button as hard as a Pachycephalosaurus's head. Comment below what you think of the project so far, or perhaps a dinosaur you would like to see me cover in the future. And be sure to subscribe if you're new so you don't miss any new updates or part 2 of the Pachycephalosaurus project. So with that said, let's jump back to the episode. So Pachycephalosaurus, what else did it look like? Well, it had a small beak, similar to a bird, but unlike a bird, it actually sported some weird small teeth inside the front portion of its beak. Now, another weird and sad fact that I stated earlier on the video, the only remains we have of a Pachycephalosaurus is a skull, and we don't have any remains of its entire body, unfortunately. So all the estimations of what it actually looked like, as well as the whole body, are basically based off the skull, as well as some other animals that are closely related to Pachycephalosaurus. So up until more discoveries are made on this dinosaur, unfortunately we don't exactly know what it truly looked like. Now, how did the Pachycephalosaurus get famous? Well, to be honest, it didn't really, because it's only really famous from one place, and that's Jurassic Park: The Lost World. Now, obviously, it's been featured in other books and films, but where it really got its rise was Jurassic Park: The Lost World, the second Jurassic Park installment, or the sequel to the original Jurassic Park from 1993. At any rate, it was seen butting heads into various different things in Jurassic Park: The Lost World for a very short period of time. And then again, it was featured in Jurassic World, the very first movie, but there it was only mentioned as a supposed herd of Pachycephalosauruses escaped their enclosure or something along those lines. And one thing I should briefly mention, I've noticed Jurassic Park as well as Jurassic World have done really kind of a strange thing with their Pachycephalosauruses, as well as their Dilophosaurus. Now, I don't understand why they exactly did this to these particular dinosaurs, but we all know that Jurassic Park is pretty famous for, well, perhaps outlandishly expanding some of the dinosaurs bigger than they actually would be. However, in the case of the Pachycephalosaurus, as well as the Dilophosaurus, they're actually represented a lot smaller than what they would have been in real life, which I just find a little strange. I'm not sure why they did that exactly. Then again, maybe they needed a world where basically not absolutely everything would basically be able to kill you within an instant. Other than that, I have no reason as to why you would actually represent these things smaller than what they were, because it just kind of takes some of the glory away from them, and they, well, deserve a little bit more notoriety than some of those big carnivores that they are given, well, more notoriety too. Other than that, the Pachycephalosaurus has been featured in the famous Jurassic Park, Operation Genesis, and Jurassic Evolution video games, as well as Jurassic Park Alive, which I actually used to play that game quite a bit. It's actually not bad. It gives you fun facts while you catch these dinosaurs as well. It's a lot like Pokemon Go, though. At any rate, apart from me being sidetracked, it has been featured in various other Jurassic Park medias as well. Because, well, it's seriously a fan favorite because everyone loves a Pachycephalosaurus. Because it's cute, it's adorable, it's a head-butting mess. Now come on, who could not love this dino? Now, it's also been recently featured in the Prehistoric Planet, which I'm actually a big fan of that series, and I've yet to see the second one still, unfortunately, so please no one ruin that for me in the comment section below, because as a matter of fact, I'm probably going to try and make some time to watch that second season, so I can learn some more fun facts about the Pachycephalosaurus for round 2 or part 2 of this, project or series, or, yeah, episode, whatever you want to call it. Now let's move on to diet and behavior of the Pachycephalosaurus. Now, of course, people like the science hippies, of course, think the Pachycephalosaurus was a herbivore. And some others speculate that it could have been omnivorous, which means it basically could have eaten a combination of both plants and animals. And it should probably be briefly mentioned that technically in nature there is no such thing as a true carnivore or a true, well, herbivore. Because every now and then you will see herbivores munching on little, well, various other things that are definitely not plants. And it's on YouTube, but be forewarned, if you're going to watch that, it's a little shocking seeing a deer eat a bird or some various other small animals. It's a little messed up. But in all honesty, I'm leaning towards the side of omnivory because, well, looking at this thing's mouth when I was sculpting it, it's got some really weird teeth formations going on. A large majority of them are kind of leaf-shaped, like the back ones, which indicates that it probably primarily ate plants. However, the ones that are on the front of the beak are rather sharp and pointy, which is a little suspicious in my opinion. So unfortunately, it's just one of those situations where we just kind of don't have enough specimens to actually confirm either one of these estimations. Now, the thing that would honestly confirm it the best would be gut contents, which has been found in some hadrosaurs, which were thought to only be plant eaters, but upon closer examination of these gut contents of these dinosaurs, it's been discovered that they were also eating small animals as well as crabs occasionally. And it's estimated that these animals were doing this to essentially help produce eggs, because during, well, the fertilization process, a lot of these dinosaurs were very similar to birds and would lack certain calcium and would have to form it sometimes on their bones, at least that's the estimation. So in order to help produce this extra calcium needed to produce the egg, the dinosaur would be eating various other, well, things to help basically give that calcium boost required. And there is some fossil evidence of this actually happening on some dinosaurs. I believe Scotty, the world's largest T.Rex, is actually a good example of this, which I recently went to the Royal Terrell Museum for a trip, and if you haven't seen that video, be sure to check that out, because I'm honestly really debating on visiting Scotty here soon. Anyway, now on to behavior of the Pachycephalosaurus and what it used its dome-like head for. When they first saw these thick dome skulls, and these domes were very thick, they could be up to 30 centimeters in thickness, they were thought to be very strong and maybe were used for headbutting each other in contests for social hierarchy. Today, animals like bighorn sheep butt heads in this way. A thickened skull helps protect their brains from the impact. But does this fully explain the dome heads of Pachycephalosaurus? A number of paleontologists thought they should look inside the heads of the Pachycephalosaurus. So they sliced up a number of Pachycephalosaurus domes. And when they did that, they found out that maybe it wasn't strong enough to withstand the forces on head-to-head combat. However, they did discover something else. The dome was lined with meshes of fine fibers, which indicates that the dome could have been brightly colored. Therefore, they assumed that the dome would have been used as more of a display feature as opposed to a battering ram. This theory seemed to be widely accepted until 2013. A Pachycephalosaurus was found with marks showing it had survived multiple injuries to the top of its skull, and it wasn't a one-off. They went back to historical museum collections and found a lot of evidence for these lesions in very similar places on the Pachycephalosaurus, which is definitely good evidence that they were butting heads, but it still leaves the question, were they strong enough? So, to find this answer out, scientists went to CT scans to build a virtual model of the Pachycephalosaurus skull, to subject it to stress testing to find out whether or not it was actually strong enough to butt heads with its opponents. So this did actually provide the final piece of evidence. What they found was the Pachycephalosaurus could actually withstand a tremendous amount of force through the top of its skull. A similar amount of force as to what goes through American footballers when they tackle each other. We now believe Pachycephalosaurus used their heads as a formidable weapon as well as a colorful display. Two ways to demonstrate who was the boss in their prehistoric world. And that concludes our fun facts for the day of our Pachycephalosauridae. Now it's time for the build rundown. So on this project today, we built a Pachycephalosaurus skeleton, you might say. Using a lot of oven-baked clay, we sculpted away till we had basically a base frame, you might say. I should also say we used a lot of different gauges of aluminum armature wire today to make the various bones and joints along the way. I also used some colored oven clay on the claws of the feet, you might say, because that will save some painting later on, I do say. I also used some plasticine clay to help everything actually stay, although this dinosaur isn't exactly very stable yet, I do say. Even with using tin foil to help save weight and clay on the way. Hopefully the sticky tack on his feet will save the day. Hello everyone, so during this video today, I'm happy to say we'll be finishing off my Pachycephalosauridae and learning some fun facts about the bone wars along the way. So on this video today, I'll be busy sculpting away with plasticine clay on my Pachycephalosauridae. And as I add the final layers of clay, we'll be adding details along the way, bringing this prehistoric creature back to life, you could say. But we're not just working with plasticine clay today, we'll also be adding some feathers to this dinosaur, I say. Although I think it's safe to say our non-avian head-butting dinosaur will not be flying away. But in regards to my poetry today, we'll be talking about the Bone Wars, I do say. The second half of the 19th century was a prosperous time for American paleontology. States like Wyoming and Colorado turned out to be full of fossil-rich bone beds, containing never-before-seen animals. Those who found them assured their place in the annals of history. With such high stakes, it's understandable there would be some sense of competition between scientists. However, the feud between Arthniel Charles Marsh and Edward Draker Cope went far beyond your typical professional rivalry. And I think that's putting it lightly. These two men ended up hating each other, because they ended up going on sacrificing career, money, legacy, just to see the other one destroyed, in a bizarre conflict known as the Bone Wars. So let's talk about the thing that really kind of cued this off, the boneheaded or butt-headed mistake. It's difficult to say when exactly Marsh and Cope decided they hated each other. When the two had first started meeting professionally, they had an annual relationship. But perhaps behind closed doors, they found each other rather grating. An unofficial start to the rivalry happened in 1869, when Cope published his latest discovery on the Elasmosaurus. This was supposed to be a moment of triumph for the young paleontologist, but he made a half-witted blunder, which turned out to be his grand humiliation. Nowadays, we know Elasmosaurus and most other plesiosaurs, for that matter, have really long necks. Cope thought the neck was the tail, so he stuck the head at the short end, which in reality turned out to be its actual tail. But Marsh pointed out the vertebrae were positioned incorrectly, which led to an argument. The two decided to divert to esteemed naturalist Joseph Leidy. According to the story, Leidy inspected the exhibit, removed the head, and placed it on the other end. Later, he also published an official correction to Cope's paper. It is a little curious that only Marsh and Cope's wrath with this episode. Anyone else would have spotted this mistake eventually. Maybe it's because these two already disliked each other at this point, and this was just more fuel for the fire. But maybe it wasn't about what Marsh had said, but how he had said it, and how he kept flaunting Cope's mistake in the public afterwards. Now, a clash of cultures. Aside from the fact that both Cope and Marsh were paleontologists, they appear to be polar opposites, which assuredly would have caused friction between the two. Cope was born into a rather wealthy family and considered himself a gentleman. Marsh, however, was a little more rough around the edges, growing up poor. Fortunately for him, his uncle was George Peabody, one of the richest and most generous philanthropists of his time, who paid for Marsh's education. The two also had different ideas on how to go about being a paleontologist. Cope was a man in the field. He wasn't afraid to get a little dirty, and traveled frequently to dig sites, and his part of the United States Geological Survey. Marsh, on the other hand, preferred to do his work from the comforts of his office, studying fossils that his agents brought to him. He persuaded his uncle to fund the Peabody Museum of Natural History of Yale, which of course was rewarded with a position as the professor of paleontology for Marsh. This was more of a symbiotic gesture, as Marsh's own inheritance meant he didn't have to teach to make money. In fact, during his fossil career, he only led 4 fossil hunting expeditions with his students in 1870 and 1873. As both prominent naturalists, Cope and Marsh had strong but different opinions on a major topic of that day, which was evolution. Marsh was a strong supporter of Darwinian's natural selection. Cope was a founder of neo-Lamarckism. That's a mouthful, I'm glad that didn't stick. For more than one reason, and here's why. Because it is a school of thought that certain adaptations that are required over an organism's lifetime can be inherited directly by its offspring. What a world that would be. I mean, life finds a way, but that's stretching it, in my opinion. Now, some early expeditions. Cope and Marsh had the luxury of starting their paleontological careers during the time the American West had recently shown to be a treasure trove of fossils. Their early expeditions were marked by a game of them constantly trying to one-up one another. Then, on top of that, the two were actively trying to sabotage one another. In 1872, Cope joined the Geological Survey led by Ferdinand Hayden. The position wasn't paid, and Cope even had to cover his own expenses, but it provided him with great opportunities and resources to collect fossils. The journey was incredibly fruitful, and Cope discovered dozens of new animal species. But the extent of support afforded to him had its limits. At one point, the paleontologist traveled to a new site and expected to find men, horses, equipment waiting for him, but he was alone. So he had to pay for a crew out of his own pocket, and unwittingly hired a couple of men who also happened to work for Marsh, which angered the latter. For his expeditions, Marsh happened to travel to the Dakota Territories, and struck a deal with Chief Red Cloud of the Sioux tribe. In order to get his help, the paleontologist would pay for fossils, and lobby on behalf of the Sioux in Washington, D.C., raising concerns about government corruption and fraud. For his part, Marsh actually kept up his end of the bargain. Now, it kind of pains me to say this part, but it's part of history, prompting Chief Red Cloud to claim him as the best white man he ever saw. Jesus Christ. These first expeditions marked the beginning of an unfortunate trend for the two scientists, one that would end up tainting their credibility. They both got into the habit of making rushed telegrams describing all of their new discoveries, leaving the full accounts till they returned home. They didn't care about being accurate, they just wanted to be first. Now, a deal with lakes. By its nature, paleontology isn't a solitary profession. Most of the lab work can be done alone, but actually securing fossils requires some interaction between agents, geologists, and other paleontologists. Therefore, many people like Joseph Leidy or Ferdinand Hayden found themselves unwillingly part of the bone wars, forced to take a side. Another one of these men was Lakes, considered now one of the founding fathers of American geology. He unwittingly strained the relationship between Cope and Marsh even further, when he wrote both to inform them of a new fossil discovery they had made in Colorado. At first, he only wrote to Marsh. He was slow to answer back, so he also inquired with Cope. Eventually, Marsh responded, clearly interested in Lake's findings. When he heard Cope also knew about it, he then sent an agent to meet with the geologist to strike a deal. Understandably, Cope was furious when he learned Lake rescinded the offer and started working with his nemesis. The arrangement turned out very well for Marsh, among other things. Lake collected for him a mysterious giant serrated tooth, which was reclaimed to be the first T.Rex tooth ever recovered. Now, war at Como Bluff. Wyoming was the true battlefield of the Bone Wars and where it was fought, and Como Bluff was its epicenter. During the late 19th century, the area was revealed to be one of the richest deposits of fossils in the country. In the late 1870s, the Union Pacific was building the first transcontinental railroad through the region. Two workers, William Reed and William Carter, sent word to Marsh that they had found a lot of bones. The scientists sent an agent to investigate the claim. Upon hearing other parties were also interested in the area, Marsh quickly drew up a contract to secure the duo's services. According to the agreement, Reed and Carlin would do their best to keep Cope out of the area. It actually did the opposite. In 1878, rumors of the major findings were being leaked. The Laramie Daily Sentinel published stories on the matter, including the exorbitant prices Marsh was apparently paying. The last part was exaggerated by two railway workers, extensively to gain leverage or a better deal from other parties. By the end of 1878, Carlin had switched sides and started working for Cope. And then the gloves were off. The excavations at Como Bluff lasted for 15 years as both Cope and Marsh opened up as many quarries as possible. The men routinely engaged in espionage, bribery, and even outright theft. On one occasion, the rival crews started an all-out fight by throwing rocks at each other. Perhaps the most heinous action from the supposed men of science was that they sometimes had fossils permanently destroyed, or entire excavation sites filled in to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. For the work, as the years spent at the sites, they were not happy ones. Because neither Marsh or Cope were particularly present at the quarries, they left other men in charge, such as Reed, Lake, Carlin, and Frank Wilson. Tensions rose higher and boiled over between them, and sooner or later, all of them quit. Carlin and Weston even went independent, selling their finds to the highest bidder. Now, front page news. For the most of its duration, the rivalry between Cope and Marsh was contained within the scientific community. As you might imagine, the average person had little knowledge of what was going on within the paleontological world, apart from the petty bickering, sabotage, and stealing that had been going on between the scientists. That changed in the mid-1880s when Cope saw his opportunity to ruin Marsh professionally. As mentioned previously, Cope worked under the American Geological Survey under Ferdinand Hayden. This was a pretty sweet gig for the paleontologist, so naturally Marsh wanted it for himself. He got his wish when one of his friends named John Wesley Powell became the new director for the scientific agency in 1881. However, a few years later, Congress wanted to investigate the administration for wasting government funds. Cope relished in the idea that Marsh could be in serious legal trouble. But unfortunately for him, both Marsh and Powell got off absolutely scot-free. Not one to easily accept defeat, Cope reached out to a journalist from the New York Herald and offered to reveal to the world the real Charles Marsh. The writer saw past Cope's obvious hatred for the paleontologist and sniffed out the real story. The newspaper ran the story with the headline, "Scientists Wage Bitter Warfare." The Bone Wars was now front page news. And this led to the overall destruction of their careers. However, we must thank them for at least getting dinosaurs out into the general public. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the Bone Wars. There is definitely a lot more on this topic. However, unfortunately, we will have to cover that at a later date. I'm not exactly sure when, but I'm sure the next dinosaur project or the next dinosaur that I run into, well, a lack of information on, we will be revisiting this topic. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed the stop-motion Pachycephalosaurus project. I definitely had fun during this project, and it turned out to be quite a cute dinosaur, oddly enough, for a head-butting monstrosity. And if you also enjoyed this project, be sure to let me know by leaving a thumbs up on this video and or commenting below what you think of it. Perhaps share with your friends, and if you're new to this channel and enjoyed the content, well, be sure to subscribe because there's a lot more where that came from. I usually do videos once a week, and then I do daily shorts, updating you on various projects. So be sure to check those out if you would like to learn more about this channel, and well, if you would like to stay more notified, be sure to check out the links in the post description. And if you have any suggestions for future projects, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Speaking of which, I will briefly be mentioning what will be coming up next. Now, my previous project was the G-Man, which, well, did unfortunately significantly better than this project with the view count. In retrospect, honestly, that's kind of a good thing, but I was definitely not expecting it to be this low. So, I recently saw a preview, you should all know, about an upcoming Godzilla show, which may involve some math. So I just wanted to let you all know it's in T-5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Anyway, thank you for sticking around to the very end of the video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe if you're new. Anyway, that's enough from me. Till next time, take it easy.